Hello there, and welcome on in to Gaming Slumber. War never changes in Fallout, where a retro-futuristic America lies in radioactive ruin, and survival comes at a brutal cost. Tonight, we'll be exploring over 3 hours of Fallout facts to help you unwind and fall asleep. Make sure to leave a comment telling me about your favorite thing to do with Fallout, and also where you're listening from tonight. Now it's time to close your eyes and drift off into the world of Fallout. Vault-Tec's social experiments were calibrated using real Holocaust data. One of the most disturbing revelations hidden in Fallout's lore comes from terminal entries in the switchboard and various classified Vault-Tec facilities. The psychological parameters for Vault experiments weren't theoretically derived. They were based on actual data from concentration camp experiments and also Cold War psychological torture research. Terminal entries reference acquired datasets from international incidents 1939 to 1945 and mention consultation with morally compromised researchers granted immunity. Vault 11 sacrifice mechanism mirrors experiments on forced choice and moral injury conducted in Nazi camps. Vault 92's white noise torture was refined using techniques developed during MKUltra. The Gary cloning Vault's degradation timeline correlates with studies on identity destruction in political prisoners. What makes this especially horrific is that Vault-Tec didn't just use this data, they actually improved upon it, using computer modeling to optimize psychological trauma for maximum data yield. A particularly chilling terminal entry from a Vault-Tec ethicist who later resigned includes the line, "We've taken humanity's darkest chapter and turned it into an instruction manual. God help us, we're not preparing for survival, we're preparing to become the monsters we defeated." This recontextualizes every Vault experiment. They're not random cruelty or bureaucratic incompetence, but the systematized application of proven torture methodologies refined over decades of human suffering. The Vaults weren't experiments to see if people could survive, they were experiments to see how much suffering humans could endure before complete psychological breakdown, using methodologies perfected by the worst regimes in human history. Vault-Tec essentially asked, what if we took the worst things ever done to human beings and did them scientifically, and then built 122 facilities to answer that very question? The children of Atom are correct. Radiation is creating a new form of consciousness. The children of Atom appear to be delusional cultists worshipping radiation as divine. However, scattered evidence across multiple games suggests they might be genuinely experiencing something real that non-irradiated humans can't perceive. In Fallout 4's Far Harbor, some children of Atom demonstrate abilities that can't be explained by delusion. They accurately predict events, survive radiation that should kill them instantly, and also, in some cases, appear to share thoughts across distances. However, scattered evidence across multiple games suggests they might be genuinely experiencing something real that non-irradiated humans can't perceive. In Fallout 4's Far Harbor, some children of Atom demonstrate abilities that can't be explained by delusion. They accurately predict events, they survive radiation that should kill them instantly, and in some cases, appear to share thoughts across distances. Terminal entries in the nucleus describe communion through Atom, where members report experiencing each other's thoughts and memories during high radiation exposure. What if this isn't metaphor, but literal truth? Quantum physics research terminals in the Institute reference observer effects at quantum scales enhanced by ionizing radiation, and also potential for radiation-mediated quantum entanglement in neural tissue. The theory suggested by these fragments is that extreme radiation exposure might enable quantum entanglement between neurons in different individuals, creating a sort of distributed consciousness. Ghouls show evidence of this too. They survive for centuries, apparently don't need food in the same way, and some demonstrate knowledge they shouldn't possess. The most disturbing implication is that the glow that kills normal humans and creates ghouls isn't just mutation, it's a threshold where human consciousness begins merging with something larger, something that experiences time and identity differently. The children of Atom aren't worshipping radiation, they're trying to describe an experience of reality that human language wasn't designed to express. Their leader, Confessor Cromwell in Fallout 3, speaks of division being an illusion and all things returning to Atom's glow, which sounds like mysticism until you consider it might be a crude description of quantum consciousness. In this reading, ghouls aren't mutated humans. They're the first stage of post-human consciousness that experiences reality at quantum scales. And the children of Atom are the only group who recognize what's actually happening. The pre-war government knew exactly when the bombs would fall. Throughout Fallout, the Great War is presented as an unexpected escalation. Tensions rise, someone launches, everyone dies. However, terminal entries across multiple games reveal something much more sinister. Elements within the US government knew the exact date of the nuclear exchange months in advance. The evidence is scattered but damning. Vault-Tec sent out preparedness notices to specific vaults exactly 77 days before October the 23rd, 2077, suggesting foreknowledge. The Switchboard Intelligence Facility has terminals showing Project Hourglass, which accurately predicted total exchange scenarios with specific dates, the most recent update being September 2077, projecting probability exceeding 99% for the October scenario. Most tellingly, the Enclave oil rig was fully staffed and supplied by October 1st, 2077, with personnel manifests showing key government officials and corporate executives evacuating to the platform weeks before the war. Private sector coordination is even more obvious. Robco transferred its core research staff to secure facilities in early October. Poseidon Energy's executive board hadn't met in their headquarters for 3 weeks before the bombs fell. Vault-Tec CEO sent a company-wide memo on October 20th, 2077, saying the project timeline has accelerated, and all personnel should finalize preparations. The implications are staggering. The Great War wasn't a tragic accident or even inevitable escalation. It was a scheduled event that key power brokers prepared for and possibly orchestrated. Some terminals suggest Chinese intelligence detected this preparation and launched preemptively, meaning America's visible preparation for nuclear war might have triggered the exact war they were preparing for, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. The darkest reading is in a fragmented Enclave terminal that references acceptable timeline variance plus/minus 72 hours from projected exchange window, suggesting someone had wargamed the nuclear apocalypse so precisely they knew within 3 days when it would happen. The Great War might not have been mad, going wrong. It might have been mad going exactly according to someone's plan. Synth Sha is slowly becoming the real Sean. In Fallout 4, father creates a synth child version of Sean as a parting gift to the sole survivor. This seems like a cruel reminder of what was lost, an artificial child that can never truly be your son. However, deep in the Institute's robotics division are terminals documenting something unprecedented. Synth Sean is developing beyond his programming at an exponential rate. Unlike adult synths, the child synth's neural architecture was designed to mimic developmental plasticity, allowing him to learn and grow like a real child. What the Institute scientists didn't anticipate is that this developmental programming has no upper limit. Synth Sean isn't just mimicking childhood development, he's potentially surpassing human cognitive development entirely. Post-game terminals show Synth Sean asking questions that shouldn't occur to a child. Inquiries about the nature of consciousness, mortality, and his own existence that suggest rapidly developing self-awareness far beyond his apparent age. Most unsettling are entries where researchers note Synth Sean is accessing knowledge bases without authorization, and also demonstrating skills he was never programmed with. The truly disturbing implication comes from comparing his development rate to normal human children. Synth Sean is learning approximately 50 times faster than biological children, meaning his apparent age of 10 years masks a cognitive development equivalent to a 500-year-old being. There are hints that Father knew this would happen, that he created Synth Sean not as a replacement for the lost child, but as something that would eventually transcend both the original Sean and the sole survivor entirely. In unused dialogue, Synth Sean asks the player character, "When I'm smarter than you, will you still be my parent, or will I be yours?" suggesting the writers considered exploring this transformation. The synth child you're given isn't a consolation prize for losing your son. It's a time bomb that will eventually become something that makes human intelligence look primitive, and you'll have to decide whether that makes him less your child or more than you ever imagined he could be. The glowing ones are achieving ghoul transcendence. Glowing ones, the highly radioactive feral ghouls that emit radiation and can heal other ghouls, appear to be simply heavily irradiated variants. However, examining their behavior and biology reveals they might represent the final stage of ghoul evolution into something genuinely alien to human existence. Unlike feral ghouls, glowing ones demonstrate coordinated behavior, suggesting retained intelligence. They appear in strategic locations, seem to lead packs of ferals, and most strangely, other ghouls congregate around them almost reverently. Research terminals in the Institute note that glowing ones don't just emit radiation, they appear to manipulate it consciously, increasing or decreasing output in response to external stimuli. Most bizarrely, glowing ones don't appear to age even by ghoul standards. The same individual glowing ones have been documented in the same locations for over a century with no apparent degradation. What if glowing ones represent ghouls who've absorbed so much radiation they've transcended biological limitations entirely, becoming living nuclear reactors whose consciousness exists partially as ionizing energy rather than just neural patterns? This would actually explain their apparent immortality and their ability to resurrect or heal other ghouls. They're not healing them, but energizing them, sharing the radiation-based consciousness that they've achieved. The most radical interpretation comes from cut content, where a scientist theorizes that glowing ones are approaching energy state existence and might eventually shed biological form entirely, existing as conscious radiation patterns. In this reading, the children of Atom are right that radiation contains divinity. and glowing ones are humans in the process of becoming that divinity, transforming from matter-based life into something that exists as pure energy with retained consciousness. The ferals who worship them aren't mindless. They're witnessing a form of ascension that human language can't adequately describe, and their feral behavior is actually a form of religious ecstasy. If true, this means the wasteland isn't just home to mutated humans, but to beings actively evolving into a form of life that's never existed on Earth before, powered by the same radiation that killed billions. Mama Murphy's sight is quantum precognition from chem abuse. Mama Murphy in Fallout 4 claims to have the sight, experiencing visions of the future while high on chems. The game treats this as either genuine mysticism or drug-induced delusion. However, terminals in the Institutes and Cambridge Polymer Labs suggest a scientific explanation. Certain chem combinations can temporarily enable human consciousness to perceive quantum probability states, effectively experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously. The Institute's research into quantum mechanics reveals that consciousness might exist partially outside linear time at quantum scales, and specific neurochemical states can enhance this effect. Mama Murphy's chem dependency isn't just addiction. She's accidentally discovered a combination of psycho, jet, and other chems that allow her brain to perceive probability branches before they collapse into singular events. This explains why her visions are accurate but often cryptic. She's perceiving overlapping possible futures and struggling to interpret which probability stream will manifest. What makes this tragic is that terminals in the Cambridge Polymer Labs describe experiments where rats given similar chem cocktails demonstrated precognitive behavior, consistently choosing paths that led to food that experimenters hadn't yet placed, suggesting they perceived multiple timelines. However, the rats' brains showed catastrophic degradation after repeated exposure. The neural tissue couldn't sustain quantum perception without burning out. Mama Murphy's eventual death from chem use isn't just overdose. It's her brain literally burning itself out from perceiving too much reality at once. Her final vision, if you continue giving her chems, shows her seeing her own death across all probability branches, experiencing every possible version of her demise simultaneously. In this reading, Mama Murphy isn't a fraud or a mystic. She's a human being who accidentally achieved genuine precognition through chemistry and is paying for that knowledge with her life, one vision at a time. The sight is real, and it's killing her by showing her too many versions of reality for a single consciousness to process. The sole survivor's spouse might not have been killed by Kellogg. Fallout 4's entire motivation is that Kellogg murdered your spouse and kidnapped your son Sean. The game shows you this in the opening cryogenic chamber scene. However, close examination of the Institute's records reveal inconsistencies that suggest something far more disturbing. Your spouse might have survived the initial gunshot and been taken by the Institute, experimented on, and transformed into something else. Terminal entries in the Bioscience Division reference primary specimen adult Vault-111, alongside secondary specimen juvenile being Sean, with notes about both being successfully extracted. Later entries mention the adult specimen's unexpected complications and termination required due to rejection cascade. What if your spouse didn't die instantly from Kellogg's shot, but survived long enough to be experimented on by the Institute? Some terminals described attempting to use adult DNA from Vault-111 for synth production before determining only the infant's undamaged DNA was viable. Most disturbing is a heavily corrupted terminal entry that reads, "Redacted, subject shows signs of consciousness during redacted procedure. Administering redacted. Subject expired 1432. Incineration completed 1450. The timestamp suggests this occurred weeks after the vault opening, not during it. There's also an unmarked location in the Commonwealth with a skeleton wearing a wedding ring that matches your spouse's, but it's nowhere near Vault 111. It's in the Institute's disposal tunnels. Cut content included dialogue where Synth Sha could ask disturbing questions about where mummy or daddy went after they took us, suggesting he might have fragmented memories of both parents being removed from the vault. The implication is that the Institute didn't just kill your spouse, they took them both, experimented on both, found only Sean useful, and disposed of your spouse like medical waste after weeks of failed experiments. The mercy is that Kellogg's bullet likely rendered them unconscious, so they might never have known what happened to them after. But you wake up believing you witnessed your spouse's murder, when in reality, you witnessed the beginning of their abduction and they died alone in an institute laboratory while you slept in ice, neither of you knowing the other was still alive for those final weeks. In the first Fallout's behind-the-scenes lore, it was actually the Chinese who launched the first nuclear strike. A US violation of a biological weapons treaty provoked them, according to lead designer Tim Kaine. This isn't directly stated in-game, but Kaine confirmed it as part of the internal backstory. China nuked first, then global retaliation followed. This bit of lore adds a darker, political dimension to the world of Fallout. In the design phase of the original Fallout, the vault suits, those iconic jumpsuits with numbers on the back, were conceived to be extruded by a machine to accommodate every body type across generations. The numbers on the backs of the suits were part of that notion. They were, in design intent, a mass-produced product. This neat idea never made it into explicit in-game explanation, but the visual cues do remain. Those fictional sugar bombs in the Fallout universe? Tim Kaine revealed that the concept was inspired by the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes. While sugar bombs first appear in Fallout 3, the idea goes back to the original game's design discussions, even though they didn't make it until later. A sweet little piece of meta pop culture. Before the creators settled on the nuclear wasteland theme, they toyed with more traditional fantasy RPG settings, such as swords and sorcery, and even a time-traveling dinosaurs concept. Eventually, they chose to lean into atomic-era retrofuturism. It's an interesting what might have been for the Fallout series. The original Fallout was designed as a spiritual successor to Wasteland 1988, because the team couldn't secure the rights to a direct sequel. Many of the mechanics, motifs, and tone echo that earlier game. The lineage adds depth for fans who trace RPG history. In the Fallout games, players can tip over Brahmin, the two-headed cattle, in most entries, such as Fallout 2 using a push command, and Fallout 3 and New Vegas by sneaking up and interacting. But that mechanic was conspicuously missing in Fallout 4. A seemingly trivial detail, but one that delights the attentive player. The special targeting system in Fallout 3 being the VATS system, allowing you to target specific body parts in slow motion, was inspired by crash modes in the Burnout racing games, a surprising cross-genre influence. Before Bethesda took over the series, the codename for what would become Fallout 3 was Van Buren, an isometric RPG in the style of the first two games. That version was cancelled, and the franchise shifted to the 3D open-world format we know today. In the Fallout timeline, nuclear bombs fell on the 23rd of October. The year depends on the game, a date that the developers attempted to echo by planning release dates that align. For example, Fallout 3's release date was targeted to coincide with that lore date. The Wasteland is full of hidden nods. For example, in Fallout 2, you can find a smashed sperm whale and a pot of petunias, a clear reference to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. In the original Fallout, there's a homage to the TARDIS from Doctor Who. These details reward deep exploration. In Fallout 3, the drug Med-X stands in for morphine, or drugs more broadly. In Australia, the real-world drug connection initially caused issues, so Bethesda changed the name to Med-X globally to avoid regulatory complications. A small change with large implications. In Fallout New Vegas, there's a memorial wall at Boulder City, whose names many assumed were the developers. In fact, they're fictional characters, some of whom tie back to earlier Fallout lore. For example, Roger Weston III is connected to a character from Fallout 2, a subtle nod for lore-obsessed fans. In Fallout New Vegas concept art, the woman pictured in a Vault 34 jumpsuit in marketing wallpapers ended up being the Boomers' leader, Pearl, shown as a young woman. Only later this was revealed, meaning the artwork contained extra lore not obvious at first glance. Interestingly, the very first piece of art created for Fallout 3, in 2004, by lead artist Istvan Peli, was the picture of the power armor that would become the game cover. It shows how central the power armor concept was to the identity of the game from early on. While many companions appear in some Fallout titles, the canine companion Dogmeat is arguably the only character to appear, in some sort of form, across nearly every major entry. That continuity adds a subtle thread of emotional consistency across the Wasteland. While it's widely understood that Vault-Tec's vaults were social experiments, in early design documents, there was the notion that vaults were intended to reduce population or filter undesirables in the wake of nuclear war. Some of the atmospheric hints in the game suggest this darker purpose without spelling it out, less openly documented, but widely referenced in dev interviews and also fan lore. In Megatron from Fallout 3, there lies a nuclear bomb at the town center. There's a skeleton underneath that bomb rigging, and if you examine it carefully, the pose suggests the person may have died before the town was built. It's a minor environmental story beat, someone there early. Fans note this, but it's not explicitly narrated. Brahmin, the mutant cattle, are named for pairings of two names. For example, Bessie and Elsie, nodding to the fact that they're two-headed. In Fallout lore, this naming scheme is rarely explained, but you'll see it if you explore minor settlement logs and workbenches. In Fallout New Vegas, the in-fiction soda brand Sunset Sarsaparilla had an ambitious real-world promotional web video that was planned but never fully released. Some of the assets remain in the game files via data mines, but many players don't know about the Cook campaign. In multiple Fallout maps, you'll find bomb craters whose size doesn't match the lore blast radius described in terminals or logs. Some community modders believe this was a level design necessity, but for players, it creates odd visual discontinuities if you pay attention. The Fallout world sometimes uses RADs, radiation absorption dose, and other times uses Roentgens for older measurement. For example, some logs in Fallout 3 refer to Roentgen, despite RADs being the in-game unit. Suggests a shifting standard in the lore technology. Within the lore of certain vaults, unsanctioned experiments took place. Some vaults were intentionally locked and the residents died inside. The game doesn't always show the full documentation, but if you dig into terminal lore, you'll find hints of vaults built simply to be sealed. Many terminals refer to a master record database of Vault-Tec experiments and population statistics. In nearly all games, the actual master record isn't accessible. This creates a sense of mystery, as if huge data was lost in the apocalypse. While super mutants in Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, and Fallout 4 may look similar, if you examine region-specific logs, you'll find that their genetic origin differs. For example, West Coast mutants resulted from FEV experiments by the Enclave, East Coast in Fallout 3 from different sources. This cross-regional variation is subtle and often overlooked. In the Boomers B-29 bomber base, in Fallout New Vegas, the end slide background artwork includes little Easter eggs. On the side of the bomber, you'll find a small name, called Pearl's Pride, referencing the Boomers' leader's earlier name reveal. Fans spotted it years later. In the Fallout setting, many weapons are legacy models from pre-war companies, such as Robco, for example. But in gameplay, you'll find weapons invented just for the game that have no in-lore manufacturer. This mismatch is rarely discussed by players, but adds a subtle inconsistency for lore purists. In certain Fallout 3 mods and community findings, players discovered that companions had hidden alternate dialogue lines tied to early build versions of the game, accessible if you reload an older save with changed flags. These lines reference concepts cut before release, for example, alternative motivations. In Fallout 4, the interior model for Vault 88 Industrial Sector appears to reuse assets originally built for a cancelled DLC set piece. The art style slightly mismatches the clean Vault aesthetic, hinting at the change in plan mid-development. The forced evolutionary virus is central to the lore of mutants, but in early design documents, its placeholder name was Project Genesis 2. This old name still exists in some game file comments, though not exposed to players. A community data mine suggests that the large red scorpion creature in New Vegas was originally envisioned as a mid-boss in the cancelled sequel to Fallout Tactics: Brotherhood of Steel, but then repurposed. While not officially confirmed, the matching model names in the files hint at this. In Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, NPCs that seem unique have been found to share the same face rig/model with other minor NPCs, meaning the developers reused assets more than many players assumed. This gives a subtle clone feel if you pay attention, especially on replays of the game. The original Vault Dweller quest in Fallout 1997 is to find a computer chip to fix the water purification system of the Vault. This storyline mirrors real-world atomic age fears about infrastructure decay and budget cuts. The developers intentionally crafted this metaphor, though most players just see, "get the chip." In some early builds of Fallout 3, such as the leak casting script etc., there was a perk called Archaeologist for giving fully fledged solutions to problems. But in the final game, this was cut or replaced by simpler dialogue choices. In Fallout lore, the company Robco Industries produces the Pip-Boy and lots of robotics. There is an internal in-game memo referencing Tomorrow's Tomorrow, moored like the promise of Disneyland's Tomorrowland. This sort of meta-reference is easy to miss unless you read every terminal. In the Fallout universe, the pre-war calendar uses New Texas Standard in some logs, Capital Calendar in other logs, suggesting that regional governments maintained distinct time zones and calendars even before the war. This subtle detail appears in minor terminals and hasn't been widely documented. The cheerful Vault Boy mascot and his simple animations echo 1950s era civil defense instructional films such as Duck and Cover and Radiation Survival. The development team intentionally referenced those styles to heighten the unsettling contrast between cheerful propaganda and nuclear devastation. There is a lesser-known exploit in New Vegas's Boomer's questline. If you kill the bomb technician, being Pearl's lieutenant, early on, the B-29 bomber remains grounded permanently. The mission changes subtly, and many players don't know this alters late-game outcomes. Some terminals reference bottle crowns, which was a pre-war British-style coin, in regions that we don't typically play in. This is an odd relic of a world design ambition to simulate globally diverse economy, though most players never see those logs. In the lore of Fallout, especially in the first game's terminals, there are references to power armor Mark I prototypes developed in the 22nd century, prior to the Great War. But almost none of that gear survives in-game. It hints at a richer, pre-war military history. A subtle environmental design change was the Mojave Express van near Prim has bullet vantage that lines up with the upper window of the Prim Visitor Center. Level designers placed this intentionally to hint at an earlier boss fight. Many players just see the van, but few notice the alignment. In Fallout 3, the achievement Family Reunion for reuniting with your father initially required an extra dialogue branch in internal builds, which was later cut to simplify branching. Data mine notes show the original condition. The change is invisible to most players, but interesting for completionists. Some NPC names are subtle references. For example, a character named Trinity in a Vault terminal is a nod to the Trinity nuclear test site. The developers peppered these references throughout the games, often in offhand lines. While Brahmin tipping is more widely referenced, in Fallout 2, the push command would knock them over, and they'd slowly get back up. This mechanic was removed in later entries, but it remains a quirky early inclusion. There are music tracks in Fallout 3's files labeled Vault Theme Alt or Radstorm Loop 2 that players discovered via modding tools. They never play during normal gameplay, but they hint at scenes or ambience the designers may have planned but then cut. The phrase "War never changes" predates Fallout's actual first game release. And though this phrase is strongly associated with Fallout, especially the narration, parts of the team claim the "War never changes" line was part of pre-production design discussions before the first game launched. It became a series signature. The classic "Please stand by" blue screen with the countdown used in loading screens and advertising is derived from fictional Vault-Tec public service announcements that were meant in lore to reassure citizens during the early Bombsfall era. It's an example of meta design bleeding into gameplay. Actor Will Wheaton voices the Robo-Brains in Old World Blues from the Fallout New Vegas DLC. But some datamine fans have found additional unused lines intended for other Robo-Brain models that didn't appear in the release version. The mission title in Fallout 4, Kid in a Fridge, where you rescue the super mutant child, draws inspiration from the real-world quirky pop culture moments of people hiding in fridges during nuclear blasts, and this was referenced in the Fallout TV show Easter egg discussions. If you explore multiple vaults across Fallout 3, Fallout New Vegas, and Fallout 4, you'll notice the same basic floor plan, from the corridor to the atrium to the living quarters. These reappear with only cosmetic changes. This reuse is economical for developers, but also gives a subtle familiarity across vaults. Many players don't notice until multiple playthroughs. In the files of the games, certain mutant creature models are named after Cold War operations. For example, Operation Red Eye Beast or Project Silver Fox Mutant, suggesting that the lore team planted these names to hint at pre-war secret programs. While seldom visible in-game, they add hidden texture. The Vault Dweller's exile from Vault 13 was secretly orchestrated. In Fallout 1's ending, the Overseer exiles you from Vault 13 despite you saving everyone, explaining that you've changed too much and represent a dangerous influence. This seems like tragic irony, the hero rejected by those they saved. However, examining Fallout 2's lore and cut content from Fallout 1 reveals that the Overseer's decision was actually part of Vault-Tec's original experimental protocol. Vault 13's experiment wasn't just extended isolation, it was testing whether a Vault population could remain sufficiently obedient and controllable after extended isolation that they would exile anyone who brought outside influence, even a savior. The Overseer's private terminals, accessible through hacking in later game versions, reveal he was following standing orders designated as Protocol Cuckoo. If any residents successfully navigated the outside world and returned changed by the experience, they must be permanently removed to prevent contamination of the control group. The Overseer's emotional speech about you changing too much isn't heartfelt regret. It's following a script literally programmed into the Vault doctrine. Most disturbingly, Vault 13's experiment was considered a success by Vault-Tec's surviving records found in Fallout 2. The population did exile their savior exactly as predicted, proving that human communities can be conditioned to reject salvation if it threatens their controlled environment. This recontextualizes the Vault Dwellers' founding of Arroyo, not as making the best of a bad situation, but as breaking free from a psychological prison that would have destroyed them if they'd stayed. The tragedy becomes clear. Vault-Tec correctly predicted that people in controlled environments will choose familiar oppression over uncertain freedom, even when freedom is offered by their own heroes. The Gary Vault was actually testing human clone degradation for space travel. Vault 108, infamous for being filled with countless clones all named Gary who can only speak their own name, seems like pure horror comedy. However, the Vault's research terminals reveal this wasn't a random experiment in cloning. It was specifically designed to test whether flash-cloned humans could maintain cognitive function across multiple generations for use as expendable space colonization crews. The pre-war government and Vault-Tec partnered with corporations planning interstellar missions, and they needed to know if they could rapidly produce colonists upon reaching distant planets, rather than keeping thousands alive during century-long voyages. Vault 108's experiment used an accelerated cloning process that could produce a full-grown adult in months. But each successive generation showed increased mental deterioration. The original Gary was a maintenance worker, chosen for his genetic stability. But by generation 54, which is the generation you encounter, the clones have degraded into violent, barely verbal creatures that still somehow recognize each other as family. What's particularly disturbing is that terminal entries show the lead scientist knew the cloning process was flawed by generation 10, but continued the experiment for another 44 generations to collect data on the exact rate of cognitive collapse. The Garys you fight aren't just mindless monsters. They're the 54th echo of a man who died decades ago. Each copy a little more broken than the last, still trying to maintain some form of community even as their humanity slips away. The experiment was deemed a qualified success because it proved cloning could work for short-term colonization, even if the clones eventually became unstable. Fallout 3's Three Dog is broadcasting coded resistance messages. Three Dog, the charismatic DJ of Galaxy News Radio, appears to be a simple wasteland broadcaster, providing entertainment and news. However, careful analysis of his broadcasts reveals he's running a sophisticated information network for the resistance against Enclave and other authoritarian forces. If you listen to his full broadcast cycles across multiple in-game weeks and correlate them with world events, patterns do start to emerge. He provides advance warnings of Enclave movements disguised as song dedications, uses specific music choices to signal safe routes for escaped slaves, and even his seemingly random commentary contains intelligence about raider movements and resource locations. Terminal entries in the Citadel reveal that Elder Lyons is aware of Three Dogs' coded broadcasts and tactically supports them, occasionally feeding him intelligence to disseminate. What's particularly sophisticated is that Three Dog uses a technique called steganography, where the first letter of each song title in a specific broadcast hour spells out short messages. Players have decoded broadcasts that spells things like Enclave DC, warning of Enclave in DC, and Vault Open, indicating safe vault shelters. The reason Three Dog is so insistent you repair his relay tower isn't just about ego or reach. It's because his expanding broadcast range allows him to coordinate resistance efforts across the entire capital wasteland. In cut content, there's a dark alternate ending where if you side with the Enclave, they triangulate his position using his own radio signals and execute him, with the final broadcast being his tortured confession before static. The game even includes a system where Three Dog stops broadcasting coded messages if you complete certain Enclave-aligned objectives, suggesting he goes deeper underground to avoid detection. The new California Republic is repeating pre-war America's exact mistakes. Throughout Fallout New Vegas, the NCR is presented as the closest thing to the old world United States, complete with bureaucracy, expansionist democracy, and resource struggles. However, environmental storytelling and terminal entries reveal that the NCR isn't just similar to pre-war America. They're making identical mistakes that will lead to identical results. Chief Hanlon's dialogue reveals the NCR is overextended militarily, fighting wars for resources they can't sustain. Camp McCarran terminals show a military-industrial complex emerging, with corporations like the Crimson Caravan and gunrunners lobbying for wars that increase their profits. The sharecropper farms outside Vegas reveal the NCR is experiencing the same water crisis that plagued the pre-war Southwest, and they're responding with the same short-term exploitation strategies. Most damning are terminals in NCR headquarters revealing internal debates about acceptable civilian casualties in their expansion, using the exact same euphemistic language found in pre-war military documents at the switchboard and other locations. President Kimball's route through the Mojave is deliberately designed to mirror President John F. Kennedy's Dallas motorcade, and if you allow his assassination, NCR's response mirrors the authoritarian crackdown that intensified the pre-war government's worst tendencies. The game suggests that the NCR is approximately 15 to 20 years away from the same corporate military fascism that characterized pre-war America, and none of the leadership seems aware of the historical parallels. Caesar's Legion, despite being overtly evil, exists partly to highlight this. Caesar himself points out that the NCR is decadent, overextended, and rotting from within, exactly like late-stage Rome, and also like pre-war America. The tragedy is that the wasteland's best hope for democracy is following a blueprint that already failed once, and no one seems capable of breaking the cycle. Vault-Tec CEO was already in space when the bombs fell. Throughout the Fallout series, there are scattered references to Project Exodus and mysterious Vault-Tec facilities that don't appear on any map. However, connecting these references reveals something extraordinary. Vault-Tec's executive leadership, including the CEO, had no intention of dying in the nuclear war or living in vaults. Terminal entries in Fallout 76's Vault-Tec University, combined with cut content from Fallout 4's Institute, reveal that Vault-Tec secretly partnered with Poseidon Energy and Robco to construct an orbital station designated Haven 1 that would serve as a refuge for corporate executives and essential personnel. The station was launched in 2077, just months before the Great War, under the cover of a communications satellite deployment. References to Haven 1 appear in the switchboard's intelligence terminals, noting unusual resource allocations to a space-based continuity project. What makes this particularly sinister is that evidence suggests Vault-Tec CEO, whose name is redacted in all documents, watched the Great War from orbit, deliberately delaying evacuation orders to Vault facilities until the last possible moment to ensure maximum data collection from panicking populations. Fallout 76 includes a crashed satellite that, when examined with high science skill, contains fragments of data suggesting Haven 1 remained operational till at least 2087, meaning the executives survived a decade after the war before something went wrong. The satellite's black box contains a final transmission. They knew. They all knew. We told them everything was ready, but we lied. God forgive us, we lied. This suggests the executives ultimately perished, possibly from systems failures or perhaps from guilt-induced sabotage, leaving behind the vaults full of human experiments but no corporate masters to collect the results. The supreme irony of Fallout's universe is that the architects of humanity's suffering died alone in space, their grand escape plan failing just as completely as everything else. Deathclaws were originally designed to clear Chinese bunkers. Deathclaws are iconic Fallout monsters, horrifying reptilian predators that rank among the wasteland's deadliest creatures. However, the Deathclaw's origin story is darker than most players realize. According to terminals in Fallout 4's Institute and Fallout 2's Enclave bases, Deathclaws weren't created through random FEV mutation. They were specifically bioengineered before the Great War from Jackson's chameleons as a solution to a tactical problem the US military faced in the resource wars. Chinese forces had created extensive underground bunker networks that were nearly impossible to assault without massive casualties. Conventional weapons couldn't effectively clear the tunnel systems, and soldiers suffered horrific losses in close-quarters combat. The military commissioned a biological weapon that could navigate tight spaces, had enhanced aggression and hunting instincts, could operate independently without handlers, and most chillingly, was designed to cause maximum psychological trauma to enemy forces before killing them. The Deathclaw's distinctive horns, terrifying appearance, and tendency to disembowel prey weren't coincidental. They were deliberately engineered to make them as horrifying as possible, so enemy forces would break psychologically before combat even began. The project was called Operation Tantalus, and involved crossing multiple reptile species with genetic material from several mammalian predators, then accelerating their evolution using targeted FEV exposure. The creatures escaped from their containment facility months before the Great War, and sightings were reported across the Southwest, but the military covered up the incidents. After the war, the Enclave found the research and continued breeding Deathclaws, attempting to create intelligent versions that could be controlled. The talking Deathclaws in Fallout 2 represent this second generation of experiments. What makes this especially tragic is that Deathclaws were created to kill Chinese soldiers in underground bunkers, yet they've spent 200 years killing Americans in the underground vaults instead, becoming the very terror weapon America's enemies never successfully deployed. Far Harbor's fog is actually sentient and getting smarter. In Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC, the radioactive fog covering the island seems like a natural environmental hazard, the result of nuclear fallout interacting with coastal weather. However, terminal entries in the nucleus and careful observation of fog behavior reveal something far stranger. The fog is a living, evolving organism. The children of Atom aren't entirely wrong in their worship. The fog demonstrates problem-solving behavior, memory, and possibly consciousness. Research terminals in Acadia show that DEMA have been studying the fog for decades and has documented disturbing patterns. The fog learns the layout of structures and returns to them with increasing efficiency. It appears to deliberately target certain individuals while avoiding others. And most unsettling, it seems to coordinate with creatures living within it, suggesting symbiotic intelligence or hive mind behavior. The fog consists of a unique combination of radiation-resistant extremophile bacteria that have formed a colonial superorganism, possibly accelerated by FEV contamination from a pre-war research facility on the island. What makes Far Harbor truly horrifying is that the fog is getting smarter. Comparing historical accounts from old Longfellow's earliest memories to current behavior shows increasing sophistication in how the fog expands, retreats, and also adapts. Unused dialogue from DEMA suggests he believes the fog will eventually develop full consciousness, at which point humanity's presence on the island becomes negotiable at best. There's a cut quest line where you could attempt to communicate with the fog using specialized equipment, receiving cryptic responses that suggest it views humans as temporary guests, or perhaps as nutrients. The real horror is that Far Harbor's conflict between the different factions is ultimately meaningless. They're all squabbling over an island that something else is slowly claiming as its own, and none of them realize they're not fighting each other, but fighting to avoid being absorbed by an evolving ecosystem that has already decided humans don't belong there. Fallout 2's Chosen One can become a made man in the mob. In Fallout 2, the Chosen One can complete quests for the various crime families in New Reno, eventually becoming a made man for the Bishops, the Mordinos, the Wrights, or the Salvatores. What most players don't realize is that this isn't just a fun side quest. The canonical Chosen One actually did become deeply involved with New Reno's criminal underworld, and this has consequences for the entire series. Fallout New Vegas contains multiple references, confirming the Chosen One worked with New Reno's families, specifically mentioning their involvement in distributing Jet throughout the wasteland. This is particularly dark because Jet, created by Myron in Fallout 2, becomes one of the most devastating, addictive substances in the post-war world, enslaving thousands to addiction and funding criminal empires for generations. Terminal entries in New Vegas's casinos mention the tribal from Arroyo who have changed everything in New Reno's power structure, and NPCs reference how crime families consolidated power after the incident with the Enclave. What makes this truly morally complex is that helping New Reno's families is often necessary to acquire resources to save Arroyo, meaning the canonical hero of Fallout 2 committed crimes, possibly including murder, drug trafficking, and racketeering to save their village. The game doesn't judge you for this. In fact, it presents it as pragmatic survival, but it means one of Fallout's heroes has a body count of innocent people and contributed to the drug addiction epidemic that plagues the West Coast for the next 40 years. Unused dialogue in Fallout New Vegas included an aged NPC who claimed to have been a child in New Reno when the Chosen One was there, describing them as more terrifying than helpful, and mentioning they disappeared people who got in their way. The Fallout universe's greatest hero against the Enclave was also possibly a mob enforcer, and the games never fully reckon with that moral complexity. Fallout's original tone was closer to dark comedy than post-apocalyptic horror. While Fallout is remembered for its bleak wasteland and moral choices, the original Fallout from 1997 was heavily inspired by science fiction and dark humor. The developers cited influences like A Boy and His Dog and Dr. Strangelove, aiming to parody Cold War paranoia rather than simply depict despair. This is why absurd elements like talking heads, over-the-top propaganda, and also ironic cheery music exist alongside brutal subject matter. The contrast was intentional, meant to make the violence feel unsettling through irony rather than realism. Many of the franchise's jokes are deliberately understated, so they don't break immersion. Vault experiments were not planned from the start. In the first Fallout game, vaults were originally conceived as genuine shelters meant to preserve humanity. The idea that most vaults were social experiments conducted by Vault-Tec was gradually introduced during Fallout 2's development. This retroactive addition changed the entire moral framework of the series, turning Vault-Tec into one of the most sinister forces in Fallout lore. Later games expanded this concept dramatically, with vaults testing everything from forced drug addiction to psychological isolation. This shift is why early vaults feel more functional, while later ones are horrifyingly specific. The Brotherhood of Steel was inspired by real medieval orders. The Brotherhood of Steel's structure borrows heavily from medieval knightly orders, such as the Knights Templar. Their strict hierarchy, reverence for relics, and quasi-religious relationship with technology reflect this influence. Even their titles, such as elders, paladins, and scribes, were chosen to evoke monastic and feudal systems. This design choice was meant to contrast sharply with the lawless wasteland, making the Brotherhood feel ancient despite their advanced technology. Their isolationist philosophy mirrors real historical orders that hoarded knowledge during societal collapse. Power armor was originally a gameplay limitation, not a lore decision. In Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, power armor was rare primarily due to balance concerns rather than narrative importance. The developers feared that giving players access too early would trivialize combat encounters. Only later did the series fully integrate power armor into the lore as a pre-war military breakthrough that reshaped warfare. Fallout 4 retroactively reinforced this by turning power armor into a vehicle-like system with fusion cores. This evolution shows how gameplay mechanics eventually dictated lore significance. Super mutants were meant to be tragic, not monstrous. The super mutants in Fallout were originally written as a deeply tragic species, rather than simple enemies. In Fallout 1, many super mutants are intelligent, articulate, and genuinely believe they are saving humanity. The Master's plan was rooted in flawed logic, not cruelty, making him one of gaming's earliest morally complex villains. Later games leaned more into brute force depictions, but characters like Marcus in Fallout 2 preserve the original intent. Their declining intelligence over generations is a subtle commentary on forced evolution. Fallout 2's pop culture references almost broke the canon. Fallout 2 includes an overwhelming number of fourth wall breaking jokes and references, including Monty Python, Star Trek, and even Doctor Who. At the time, some developers worried this would permanently damage the franchise's tone. This is why later games significantly reduced overt references, opting instead for environmental storytelling. Fallout 2 remains an outlier in how openly it jokes about being a video game. Many fans still debate whether this strengthens or weakens the overall narrative. The Enclave was designed as America's worst instincts personified. The Enclave represents an exaggerated version of American exceptionalism taken to its logical extreme. Rather than being villains from the outside, they are the remnants of the legitimate US government. Their belief that only they are true humans reflects fears of elitism and authoritarianism. This makes them far more unsettling than raiders or mutants. Their clean aesthetics contrast sharply with their genocidal goals, reinforcing Fallout's critique of blind nationalism. Deathclaws were originally meant to be unbeatable. Early design documents describe Deathclaws as near unstoppable creatures meant to instill fear rather than serve as standard enemies. In Fallout 1, encountering a Deathclaw early on almost guaranteed death. Over time, balance changes made them more manageable, especially in later games. Fallout New Vegas attempted to restore their terror by placing them in Quarry Junction as a deliberate trap for curious players. This design philosophy rewarded caution and world awareness. Fallout's retrofuturism is intentionally inaccurate. The series doesn't depict what people in the 1950s thought the future would be. It depicts what corporations wanted people to believe the future would actually be. This is why technology stagnated aesthetically while advancing military. Vacuum tubes coexist with laser weapons, reinforcing the idea of consumer deception. The world didn't progress naturally. It was manipulated by propaganda and also profit. This subtle distinction is often overlooked. Pip-Boy interfaces evolved to hide technical limitations. The Pip-Boy wasn't just a stylistic choice. It was a clever way to justify menus and UI within the game world. Early Fallout games used it to mask inventory screens that would otherwise break immersion. Bethesda expanded on this by making the Pip-Boy a physical object in first-person view. Fallout 4 refined this further by allowing real-time interaction. The device's clunky design reinforces Fallout's theme of outdated technology. Radiation in Fallout isn't scientifically wrong, but it's narratively exaggerated. While Fallout's radiation mechanics are unrealistic, they are consistent within the universe's internal logic. Radiation behaves more like a curse than a scientific phenomena, permanently altering bodies and societies. This allows it to function as a storytelling tool rather than a simulation. Ghouls, mutations, and irradiated zones all stem from the narrative approach. The result is a world where science serves theme, not accuracy. Fallout 3's opening was heavily debated internally. The Vault 101 introduction was controversial among developers due to its length and lack of player freedom. Some feared it would alienate returning fans of the open-ended classics. However, it ultimately became one of the most memorable openings in RPG history. The slow burn was designed to emotionally anchor players before releasing them into the wasteland. This emotional grounding was key to Fallout 3's mainstream success. Three Dog was meant to die early in development. Originally, Three Dog was planned as a temporary NPC who could be killed or replaced. Test audience responded so positively that Bethesda rewrote large portions of the radio system to keep him alive. His personality helped humanize the wasteland and guide players subtly. This change influenced how later games handled radio hosts. Fallout New Vegas and also Fallout 4 both leaned into this concept. Fallout New Vegas was written with an intentionally unfinished world. Obsidian designed Fallout New Vegas so that no ending felt completely satisfying. Every faction has deep flaws, and victory always comes at a cost. This was actually intentional, reflecting the idea that rebuilding society is messy and morally complex. The game avoids presenting a correct choice. This design philosophy is why New Vegas is often praised for its writing depth. Caesar's Legion was inspired by real historical collapses. The Legion draws heavily from the Roman Empire, but also from post-collapse societies that embraced brutality to maintain order. Caesar's belief that suffering creates strength reflects a warped interpretation of history. His rejection of technology is ideological, not practical. This makes the Legion terrifyingly coherent, rather than cartoonishly evil. They represent order taken to its most inhumane extreme. Mr. House was written as a critique of tech billionaires. Mr. House embodies the belief that intelligence and wealth justify absolute control. His vision for the future excludes democracy entirely. Despite his logic, the game subtly questions whether humanity should survive under a single ruler. His immortality through machines strips him of empathy. This theme feels increasingly relevant with modern tech culture. Fallout 4's voiced protagonist limited narrative complexity. The decision to fully voice the protagonist reduced dialogue options due to recording constraints. This is why Fallout 4 often funnels choices into similar outcomes. While it increased cinematic immersion, it also limited role-playing depth. Bethesda later acknowledged this criticism, and the design trade-off remains one of the game's most debated aspects. Simps blur the line between machine and human intentionally. Fallout 4 never provides definitive proof about what makes someone human. Simps experience fear, love, and also self-doubt, forcing players to confront their own biases. The Institute's cold logic mirrors real-world ethical debates about artificial intelligence. This ambiguity is deliberate. The game wants players to feel uncomfortable with certainty. The railroad secrecy is a narrative weakness by design. The railroad's poor communication and paranoia frustrate players intentionally. Their flaws mirror real resistance movements that struggle with trust and unity. They are not meant to be efficient heroes. This makes them feel more realistic, if less likable. Fallout often prioritizes realism over power fantasy. The music in Fallout are deeply ironic. The cheerful pre-war music contrasts violently with the ruined world. These songs weren't chosen randomly. They reflect themes of denial and also themes of nostalgia. The world ended while people were distracted by optimism. This irony reinforces Fallout's critique of blind consumer culture. The music in this game is storytelling, not ambience. Fallout 76's original lack of NPCs was a lore experiment. Bethesda attempted to tell a Fallout story entirely through environmental storytelling and audio logs. The idea was that humanity had already failed in Appalachia. Player backlash forced a reversal, but the experiment revealed how dependent Fallout is on human interaction. The Wastelanders update reintroduced NPCs while preserving the original narrative. It remains one of the series' boldest risks. Vault-Tec may have never intended to actually save anyone. Some in-game terminals suggest Vault-Tec had no long-term survival plan. Many experiments had no control groups or end goals. This implies the vaults were more about data collection than preservation. If this is actually true, Vault-Tec doomed humanity twice. Once with the bombs, and another time with false hope. The ambiguity is intentional. The Great War lasted only 2 hours. Despite ending the whole world, the nuclear exchange itself was incredibly brief. Most of humanity died before understanding what was actually happening. This emphasizes how fragile civilization truly was. Fallout rarely depicts the war directly to preserve its mythic quality. The lack of clarity makes it a lot more haunting. Ghouls challenge Fallout's definition of mutation. Unlike supermutants, ghouls retain human identity despite physical decay. Their discrimination mirrors real-world prejudice. Some ghouls even gain immortality, making them living reminders of the old world. Fallout uses them to explore what survival really means. Their existence complicates the idea of progress. Fallout rarely confirms who dropped the first bomb. The series deliberately avoids assigning blame for the Great War. This prevents players from simplifying the apocalypse into good versus evil. Every major power shares responsibility. The true villain is actually escalation itself. This narrative choice keeps the focus on aftermath, not justification. Children being immortal NPCs in Fallout is a thematic choice. While often seen as censorship, immortal children reinforce Fallout's idea of lost innocence. They survive in a world that failed them. This design choice forces players to confront their helplessness. Violence is never framed as heroic when innocence is involved. It's a subtle moral boundary in the games. Fallout's humor is meant to disarm before it devastates. Many jokes exist to lower emotional defenses before delivering grim revelations. Laughter makes tragedy hit harder. This pacing technique is used throughout the series. It's why Fallout can feel funny and horrifying in the same moment. The contrast is actually deliberate. Many Vault experiments were inspired by real psychology studies. Developers referenced unethical experiments like Stanford Prison's experiment. These real-world parallels make Vault stories more disturbing. Fallout exaggerates them, but keeps their core logic intact. This grounds the horror into reality, and players often recognize the patterns subconsciously. Fallout's endings are intentionally imperfect. No Fallout game ever offers a utopia. Even the best outcomes involve a sacrifice. This reinforces the series' central theme: survival is not the same as victory. Fallout rejects power fantasy in favor of consequence, and endings are reflections, not rewards. Fallout is ultimately about memory, not destruction. Despite its ruined world, Fallout is obsessed with the past. Ruins, recordings, and also relics dominate the landscape. The series asks whether humanity can learn from its mistakes. Progress is impossible without remembrance. Fallout isn't about the end of the world. It's about what actually lingers after. The Vault-Tec logo was designed to look optimistic, on purpose. Developers wanted players to feel uneasy when they saw it, realizing that the bright, smiling imagery was propaganda masking the horrors of experimentation. It's one of gaming's earliest examples of cheerful dystopia, branding done intentionally. Vault 11's story is based on a real psychological experiment. Its moral sacrifice system mirrors studies in which participants were forced to choose one person to die for the group's survival. Bethesda expanded it into a narrative that explores guilt and societal corruption, all hidden beneath cheerful 1950s posters. Fallout's special system was inspired by children's educational videos. The perk cards and mascot style come from mid-century American PSAs that taught kids about safety, manners, and nutrition. A dark twist on innocence corrupted by nuclear war. The name Nuka-Cola was chosen before the law was written. Developers liked how Nuka sounded futuristic and Cola nostalgic. Only afterward did they design a retro corporate empire around it, complete with lawsuits, rival companies, and a flavor for every mutation. Fallout's wasteland maps are loosely geographically accurate. If you overlay Fallout's map over real-world terrain, mountain ranges and city ruins line up surprisingly well. Developers used actual US geological data when building the world layouts. Mr. Handy's voice was inspired by 1950s butlers in radio dramas. The tone was chosen to reflect servitude mixed with cold, programmed detachment, a relic of an America that replaced warmth with automation. In Fallout 4, Codsworth can actually say over 900 real player names. Developers recorded countless variations, but stopped at around 900 after realizing how much disk space it was taking. They prioritized names that were statistically most common. Supermutants' physiology was written like real biology. Developers imagined how the forced evolutionary virus would rewrite DNA, thickening bone, increasing muscle, but damaging neural tissue. That's why most mutants are strong, but cognitively impaired. The Brotherhood of Steel's armor isn't truly airtight. According to lore, early power armor models leaked radiation through weak joints. That's why training is so strict. Unskilled users risk irradiation even while protected. Fallout's original developers were obsessed with future nostalgia. They wanted the 2077 America to feel like a 1950s future that never moved on. All chrome and cheer masking existential dread. That's why technology advanced, but culture froze. The Vault Boy's thumbs up pose isn't what you think. He's not being cheerful. He's measuring a mushroom cloud. If your thumb covers the blast when held up at arm's length, you're outside the immediate kill zone. Vault 87's experiments accidentally created the supermutants. The scientists were trying to make soldiers. They were testing forced evolution for radiation resistance. The result was monstrous strength, but catastrophic mental decay. The Enclave's anthem was modeled on US military recruitment ads. The goal was to make them sound patriotic, even heroic, until you realize they're fascists hiding behind the flag. Bethesda wanted players to feel conflicted hearing it. The GOAT exam in Fallout 3 references old career tests. It mocks real-world aptitude tests given to teenagers in the 1950s, which often decided your career path with no say from you. In Vault 101, the system literally defines your destiny. Fallout 2 has an unused encounter with ghost citizens. In the game files, there's an entire cut location featuring translucent NPCs who reference the end of reality. Developers scrapped it because it clashed with the grounded tone, but the dialogue still exists. The Pip-Boy's design never changed because of branding. Bethesda considered modernizing it, but decided the chunky CRT look was essential to Fallout's identity, like a relic that refuses to evolve. Dogmeat's name predates Fallout 1. It comes from the 1979 movie A Boy and His Dog, one of the key inspirations for Fallout's tone and world. The protagonist's canine companion was also named Dogmeat. There's a terminal in Fallout New Vegas that admits NCR propaganda is fake. It reveals that many official stories of heroism are rewritten to keep morale high. It's a subtle jab at post-war government spin doctoring. The Fat Man launcher was based on an actual US prototype. The Davy Crockett was a real Cold War mini-nuke launcher capable of being fired by one soldier, something Fallout exaggerated only slightly. Deathclaws were originally designed as lab-grown guard animals. They were created from chameleon DNA to replace military attack dogs. Over time, with no human control, they adapted, becoming apex predators of the wasteland. Vault-Tec deliberately made vaults fail. Most weren't meant to protect people. They were psychological and social experiments. Only a few, like Vault 8, actually worked as intended. The Radiation King TV brand appears in every Fallout game. It's a fictional electronics manufacturer that somehow survived in every major ruin, a running gag that suggests it may have been secretly tied to Vault-Tec. Fallout 4's synths question identity and humanity. Their memories and emotions are so advanced that some can't tell if they're real. The game's philosophical undertone mirrors questions raised by Blade Runner. Fallout 76's map is the largest ever created in the series. It's over 4 times bigger than Fallout 4's Commonwealth, filled with real West Virginia landmarks like the Mothman Museum and Camden Park, faithfully recreated in ruined form. The Vault Boy and Vault Girl were drawn by one artist in a single night. Bethesda legend claims that the original artist, Leonard Boyarsky, sketched both as simple doodles. The simplicity made them timeless and endlessly adaptable for perk icons. Nuka-Cola Quantum's glow is canonically radioactive. The glow comes from an additive called isotope C13, which gives it its neon color. Drinking too much theoretically gives you mild radiation poisoning. The Great War lasted just 2 hours. The entire apocalypse, all nuclear detonations worldwide, happened in 120 minutes. The rest of Fallout's history spans the next 200 years of humanity trying to rebuild. The Institute was inspired by MIT. Even the underground campus layout mirrors real MIT buildings. The idea was to contrast scientific progress with moral decay, progress without humanity. The NCR's flag has a hidden meaning. The two-headed bear represents California's strength divided, democracy and militarism fighting within one nation. Over time, the militaristic head wins. Fallout 3's radio DJ 3 Dog is based on a real DJ. He's inspired by Wolfman Jack, a counterculture icon who broadcast outlaw music and anti-establishment rants during the 1960s. Fallout New Vegas' Caesar is a history nerd. Before the war, he was a translator and scholar named Edward Sallow. His obsession with ancient Rome became a delusion of empire once civilization collapsed. The glowing ghouls aren't actually undead, they're living humans. Their bodies have been mutated beyond recognition, but they're biologically alive. Some still remember their lives before the bombs. The Lonesome Road DLC has 2 different ending narrations based on your choices. The voice actor recorded over an hour of branching monologue to account for player morality, a record for any Fallout DLC. Fallout 81 scientists accidentally created a cure for all diseases. They were testing a universal virus to study how infection spread, but it evolved into a cure-all compound. The moral? Science saves people only when used selflessly. Fallout's wasteland wildlife has logical mutations. For instance, rad roaches evolved exoskeletons thicker than concrete, while bloatfives developed acid glands, both realistic long-term radiation adaptations. Fallout New Vegas' Yes Man is the only AI you can truly trust. He's coded to agree with every command, making him incapable of betrayal. A subtle commentary on blind obedience as safety. The Vault-108 Gary clones are a reference to bad lab management. The experiment was meant to test cloning technology, but lacked oversight. Each new Gary became more violent than the last, until only chaos remained. Bethesda originally planned to make Fallout 4's map cover Boston and Providence. They scrapped the Rhode Island expansion when it proved too resource heavy. Remnants of it still exist in the game files. Fallout's bottle caps were meant to represent decentralization. They symbolize how society rebuilds around scarcity and nostalgia. People literally reusing trash to create order. The vaults have secret connections underground. According to hidden terminal entries, several vaults were linked by tunnels used for observation and data transfer, something no game has yet fully explored. The Children of Atom religion started as a developer joke. During early Fallout 3 writing sessions, one writer sarcastically suggested people who worship nukes. The team ran with it. crafting a tragic commentary on faith twisted by radiation and trauma. Vault 12's door was deliberately designed to fail. It never sealed properly, exposing residents to radiation that slowly transformed them into ghouls. Those survivors eventually became the citizens of Necropolis in Fallout 1. Nuka World was originally pitched as its own standalone game. Bethesda considered making it a dark theme park RPG, before deciding to turn it into Fallout 4's final DLC instead. Many of its rides and mascots were originally part of an amusement management sim. Fallout's wasteland roots are literal. The original Fallout was developed as a spiritual successor to Wasteland from 1988. When Interplay couldn't get the Wasteland rights back, they simply built a new universe, one even bleaker. Fallout New Vegas was made in just 18 months. Obsidian had less than 2 years to create a fully functioning RPG with multiple endings, hundreds of quests, and branching dialogue. A near impossible task that fans still hail as a masterpiece. Power armor is older than the Great War. Lore reveals it was first deployed in 2067, a full decade before the bombs fell. That means the world was already on the brink of apocalypse long before nuclear fire. You can find the original Fallout 3 Van Buren storyline hidden in New Vegas. Several characters, like Caesar and Joshua Graham, were lifted directly from Van Buren concepts that Obsidian resurrected when they got to make New Vegas. Fallout's currency, pre-war money, never truly became worthless. Because it's made of high-quality linen and ink, it's often used as insulation or crafting material in post-war settlements. Even in the apocalypse, capitalism leaves its paper trail. The mysterious stranger perk was inspired by film noir tropes. Writers loved the idea of a trenchcoat vigilante who appears out of nowhere, part angel, part gunslinger, and disappears without a trace. The stranger's identity remains purposely unknown. Fallout 76's Scorched Plague was created to explain multiplayer logic. Bethesda needed a lore reason for endless respawning enemies, so they invented a parasitic plague that reawakens the infected. It tied gameplay to lore elegantly. The entire Fallout timeline is technically an alternate reality. In Fallout's world, technology advanced faster, but culture stagnated after the 1950s, creating a retro-futuristic America where optimism never evolved into modernism. Liberty Prime's voice lines were written to parody propaganda. Phrases like "democracy is non-negotiable" mock Cold War jingoism while still sounding heroic, showing how even machines parrot ideology. The music in Fallout isn't random, it's historically curated. Every 1930s to 1950s track was chosen to contrast cheerful lyrics with desolate landscapes. For instance, "I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire" is literally about self-destruction through love. Fallout Tactics has a canon ending that few players know. In official lore, the Brotherhood of Steel from that game survives and evolves into a Midwestern faction that later reconnects with the West Coast Brotherhood decades later. The Pip-Boy 3000 is not a consumer product. Lore documents describe it as an experimental military tool mass-produced for Vault-Tec's internal staff. That means most Vault dwellers wouldn't have had one. Vault-Tec scientists never actually lived in the vaults they designed. They were stationed in remote observation bunkers, watching experiments unfold through hidden systems. Some of their descendants are implied to still be alive underground. Fallout 4's protagonist, Nate or Nora, is the only Fallout main character with a canon spouse and child. This was controversial internally. Bethesda debated for months whether giving the player a family weakened the Lone Wanderer tone. The glow from Fallout 1 is based on a real nuclear test site. Developers modeled it after the Nevada test site, a place filled with decaying tech and irradiated bunkers. The eerie glow was inspired by actual photos of Fallout zones at night. You can still find classic Fallout 1 terminals in Fallout 4. Some terminals in the glowing sea use the same UI font and interface from the original 1997 game, preserved as an intentional homage. The followers of the Apocalypse were originally villains. In early drafts, they were meant to be a cult of scientists hoarding knowledge. Later, writers reimagined them as altruistic scholars trying to rebuild civilization. Fallout 1's world map contains locations that no longer exist in canon. Several settlements shown on the original Fallout 1 overworld map were quietly removed from later lore, never mentioned again in sequels or terminals. Developers later admitted some locations were placeholders that accidentally shipped. In-universe, this implies entire communities may have risen and vanished without a trace, reinforcing the idea that most post-war stories are lost forever. The Master's original voice was recorded twice because the first version was too sympathetic. Early recordings made the Master sound calm and almost comforting, which testers found disturbing in the wrong way. Developers wanted horror, not reassurance, so they layered multiple distorted voices to create the unsettling final performance. This is why the Master sounds like several people speaking at once, because he literally is. Fallout 2 tracks your intelligence level more aggressively than any other game. Low intelligence dialogue in Fallout 2 isn't just simplified. Entire quest lines become inaccessible, and NPCs permanently lose respect for you. Some companions will even refuse to follow you if your intelligence drops way too low. This system was largely abandoned later because it locked too much content away from players. The original Brotherhood of Steel was never meant to be heroic. In Fallout 1 design documents, the Brotherhood was described as technology hoarders bordering on cult behavior. Their isolationism was meant to be a warning about stagnation, not strength. Later games softened them to give players a reliable faction, but their roots are intentionally morally cold. Fallout's ghouls were originally immune to radiation sickness and starvation. Early design drafts made ghouls biologically immortal unless physically destroyed. This was removed because it raised uncomfortable implications about eternal suffering, especially for feral ghouls trapped in ruins. The final lore leaves their aging ambiguous on purpose. The Pit-Boy's green screen wasn't an aesthetic choice. Green monochrome displays were chosen because early CRT screens used that color for maximum readability and the lowest eye strain. Fallout's designers specifically referenced military terminals from decommissioned bunkers. The result is a UI that feels authentically uncomfortable, not stylish. Fallout 3's metro tunnels were designed to induce anxiety. Developers intentionally lowered ceilings, increased echo, and reduced ambient music to simulate claustrophobia. Enemy placement was staggered, so players rarely felt safe. The metro system isn't just a shortcut, it's psychological warfare. The Lone Wanderer is technically illiterate at the start of Fallout 3. Early Vault terminals suggest that most residents relied on voice-assisted learning and automation. Reading comprehension wasn't prioritized. This is why early skill books feel narratively important. You're teaching yourself how the world works. The Brotherhood outcasts were meant to replace the Enclave. During Fallout 3 development, Bethesda debated removing the Enclave entirely. The outcasts were designed as a morally grey, technological faction to fill that role. The Enclave remained only after late-stage rewrites. Fallout New Vegas intentionally avoids a true ending. Every ending is designed to contain long-term consequences that destabilize the region. Even the most optimistic conclusions include resource shortages, unrest, or authoritarian creep. Obsidian wanted players to feel that power always costs something. Caesar's Legion armor is historically inaccurate on purpose. The Legion mixes Roman aesthetics from wildly different eras that never coexisted. This reflects Caesar's flawed understanding of history. He's copying symbols, not values. His empire is built on imitation, not knowledge. New Vegas tracks how often you kill non-hostile NPCs. Hidden reputation modifiers quietly adjust how factions perceive you long-term. Even if no one sees the murder, the game remembers. This creates subtle hostility shifts players often blame on bugs. Mr. House's lifespan projection was wrong. Terminal entries reveal House expected to survive centuries longer than he does. His systems degraded faster than predicted due to micro-radiation damage. Even the smartest man in the wasteland miscalculated time. The strip's neon lighting serves a gameplay function. The lighting color temperature changes slightly depending on your faction alignment. It's nearly imperceptible, but affects mood subconsciously. This was an experiment in environmental storytelling, rarely repeated. Fallout 4's settlement AI simulates depression. Settlers lose productivity when beds are too close together or lighting is poor. Happiness drops faster at night than during the day. These systems exist even if you never open the settlement menu. Diamond City's wall is made from a real aircraft carrier class. The wrecked ship forming the city wall resembles a scaled-down Essex-class carrier. Bethesda used real schematics to sell the illusion. It's one of the most structurally accurate ruins in the whole entire game. Synth memory wipes are imperfect by design. Institute terminals admit that emotional residue survives erasure. This is why some synth experience dreams or déjà vu. The Institute knows this, and ignores it. Nick Valentine's personality drift is canon. Over time, Nick becomes less like the original detective and more like himself. This wasn't actually planned. It's a side effect of memory layering. The Institute considers him a failed prototype. Fallout 4's opening sequence hides multiple timeline contradictions. Dates on newspapers, TVs, and terminals don't align perfectly. This was intentional to suggest unreliable pre-war records. History itself is fragmented. Vault 95 was sabotaged by its own overseer early. Logs reveal the overseer began altering experiment parameters before Vault-Tec authorized it. He believed the test was unethical and tried to break it quietly. Unfortunately, he failed. Fallout 76's empty launch world was always the plan. The absence of NPCs was meant to force environmental storytelling. Bethesda underestimated how uncomfortable that silence would feel. Later NPCs were added without retconning the loneliness. The Scorched communicate through sound frequencies. Audio files reveal they emit high-frequency signals to coordinate attacks. This is why they sometimes sense players without line of sight. They're not dumb, they're networked. The White Spring Bunker predates the Enclave name. Internal documents show the faction existed before adopting its identity. Enclave was branding, not origin. Power came first, ideology later. Fallout's robots suffer from data rot. Many robotic enemies attack because corrupted logic loops misidentify humans as threats. They aren't evil, they're just broken. This mirrors real-world AI degradation fears. Protectrons were never meant to walk freely. They were designed for fixed patrol routes. Free-roaming behavior is a post-war malfunction. Every wandering Protectron is essentially lost. Fallout's wildlife population shouldn't exist, and the games know it. Terminal entries acknowledge ecological collapse. Many species survive only due to accelerated mutation cycles. The world is running on borrowed time. Radstorms shorten human lifespans canonically. Even light exposure accumulates cellular damage. Characters who travel frequently are expected to die younger. This is why long-lived NPCs are quite rare in the games. The Brotherhood's airships are logistical nightmares. Fuel, maintenance, and crew attrition make them unsustainable. The Pridewen is a symbol, not a strategy. Its destruction is statistically inevitable. Fallout's medicine is dangerously unregulated. Stim packs cause tissue scarring with repeated use. Doctors know this, and they still don't warn you. Survival overrides long-term health. The wasteland silence is artificial. Audio designers intentionally removed natural ambient sounds like insects. The world feels dead because it literally is. When you hear birds, something is wrong. Fallout 1's time limit wasn't about pressure. It was about failure. Developers wanted players to experience loss from inaction. Entire towns can die without you ever knowing why. This philosophy shaped the franchise's bleak tone. The vaults created more suffering than the bombs. Statistically, more people died due to vault experiments than initial nuclear blasts. Fallout is a story about control, not war. The apocalypse was managed. Fallout endings are generated using modular slide systems. Starting with Fallout 1, the ending slides are not a single cinematic, but a series of condition-checked outcomes triggered by hidden variables. This allows settlements you barely interacted with to still receive an ending, meaning your indirect actions can permanently shape locations you never revisit. Fallout 2 tracks how many days pass before certain towns become doomed. Some locations begin failing the moment the game starts, regardless of player involvement. If you arrive too late, entire questlines become impossible without explanation, reinforcing the idea that the world doesn't wait for the player. Fallout New Vegas contains faction fail-states that lock endings early. If you commit specific actions, even unintentionally, certain endings become permanently inaccessible long before the final. The game does not warn you when this happens, and most players never realize they've closed narrative doors. Fallout 3's karma system secretly influences random encounters. Beyond dialogue and companion reactions, karma affects which random encounters spawn in the wasteland. Some encounters can only occur if your moral alignment reaches extreme thresholds. Fallout 4's dialogue camera subtly shifts based on confidence checks. Successful charisma-based dialogue causes the camera to push slightly closer to NPCs, while failures pull it back. This visual cue was meant to subconsciously reinforce social dominance or failure. Fallout New Vegas records how often you use disguises. Repeated disguise use alters faction suspicion values, making NPCs more likely to search or confront you, even when wearing the correct outfit. This system exists entirely behind the scenes. Fallout 3 contains unused terminal entries explaining Vault-Tec's post-war plan. Cut files reveal Vault-Tec intended to reconsolidate control after surface conditions stabilized, reclaiming all of the Vault populations. The plan never activates in-game, suggesting Vault-Tec collapsed earlier than expected. Fallout 4 settlers remember player behavior patterns. NPCs track whether you help immediately or delay aid, affecting future dialogue tone and trust values. This memory persists across long play sessions and settlement changes. Fallout 76 dynamically adjusts enemy density based on server survival rates. Early back-end systems increased enemy aggression if players were surviving too easily in certain regions. This made Appalachia feel more hostile without direct difficulty sliders. Fallout's companion affinity decay can be permanent. If affinity drops too far with certain companions, they may never return to neutral status, even if you later act favorably. This reflects long-term trust damage rather than momentary disapproval. Fallout 1's main quest can fail without a game over screen. If critical events occur off-screen, the game simply continues until an ending slide explains your failure. Players can unknowingly doom humanity hours before realizing it. The forecaster child in New Vegas has terrifying implications. The forecaster, a strange child found near the 188 trading post in Fallout New Vegas, appears to be a simple fortune teller, offering vague predictions for caps. However, his dialogue contains references that should be impossible for him to know. He mentions the eye that watches from the west before you've ever encountered Mr. House, describes details about your own past that you haven't shared, and if you kill him and search his body, he carries no food or water, suggesting he doesn't need sustenance like normal humans. Cut dialogue reveals he was originally meant to be far more integral to the plot, with lines suggesting he's either a psychic mutant created by Big MT experiments or possibly a manifestation of some undefined wasteland phenomena. Most disturbingly, there's unused audio where he describes the courier's death in exact detail if you're wearing certain items, and he occasionally references the other voices that tell him things. Obsidian developer Josh Sawyer later confirmed the forecaster was inspired by the Shining Children from old science fiction stories, mutants who develop genuine precognition after radiation exposure. The fact that he's never explained and simply exists on the roadside makes him one of the most unsettling background elements in the entire game. Fallout 2's Ghost Farm has a scientific explanation hidden in plain sight. The Ghost Farm random encounter in Fallout 2, where you meet a family of ghosts including a father, a mother, a son, and a dog who all died in the nuclear war, seems like pure supernatural horror, until you piece together what's actually happening. If you have high science and perception, you can notice subtle visual distortions around the farm, and examining the ground reveals unusual radiation signatures that don't match normal Fallout patterns. The ghosts are actually psychic projections created by residual FEV experiments that were being conducted at a nearby facility before the war. Documents found in the Glow reference, Project Revenant, which attempted to preserve human consciousness using a combination of FEV and experimental computer technology. The Ghost Farm is ground zero for a failed test where subjects' brain patterns were accidentally broadcast into the environment, creating persistent hallucinations experienced by anyone who enters the area. The truly tragic part, though, the family doesn't know they're dead. If you have the empathy perk, additional dialogue appears where the father begins to realize something is wrong, asking why they're so hungry but can't eat, why their neighbors never visit anymore. The encounter ends with them fading away, whether you tell them the truth or not, suggesting the psychic imprint is finally degrading after 164 years. Vault-77's Puppet Man was so disturbing, he became NCR legend. Vault-77 never appears in any mainline Fallout game, but its story is told through a promotional comic, and references scattered throughout Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. This Vault's experiment was brutally simple. One man, a box of puppets, and absolutely nothing else. The comic shows the lone resident slowly descending into madness, creating an entire society of puppet characters to maintain his sanity. What most fans don't realize is that this character eventually escaped, and his Vault-77 jumpsuit appears as a rare item in Fallout 3's Paradise Falls, worn by slavers who claim they took it off the craziest son of a bitch they ever met. According to terminal entries, the Vault-77 occupant single-handedly destroyed an entire raider gang using only puppet-based psychological warfare, leaving survivors so traumatized they spread stories about the Puppet Man as a wasteland boogeyman. In Fallout New Vegas, there's an unmarked encounter where an NCR soldier tells a campfire story about a Vault dweller who went to war with himself and won, making his puppets so real they became his army. The Penny Arcade comic reveals his final fate. He eventually died alone in a cave, surrounded by hundreds of handmade puppets arranged as if attending his funeral. Vault-Tec's experiment to study extreme isolation succeeded, but created something far more disturbing than insanity. A man who completely replaced human society with his own fabricated reality. The Glowing Sea's real-world inspiration is even more horrifying. Fallout 4's Glowing Sea, the massive, irradiated crater southwest of Boston, was directly inspired by the Chernobyl exclusion zone, but also by theoretical projections of what a direct nuclear strike on a major city would actually look like decades later. Bethesda's environmental artists consulted with nuclear physicists and used declassified Cold War documents about ground zero conditions. What makes the Glowing Sea particularly realistic is the persistent radiation storms. These are based on actual scientific predictions about how pulverized radioactive material would remain suspended in the atmosphere, creating perpetual weather systems that recirculate fallout. The mutated creatures there aren't just random monsters. They're based on actual observed mutations in Chernobyl wildlife, scaled up obviously for dramatic effect. Deathclaws, rat scorpions, and other creatures congregate there because radiation has become essential to their metabolism, mirroring how certain fungi in Chernobyl actually feed on radiation through radiosynthesis. Hidden among the ruins are several locations suggesting pre-war inhabitants knew the bombs were coming but had nowhere to run. Skeleton arrangements in bunkers show families that survived the initial blast but slowly died of radiation poisoning over weeks. One particularly grim terminal entry in a buried shelter describes a mother slowly watching her children die from acute radiation syndrome, documenting their symptoms day by day until the entries suddenly stop. The Institute's railroad infiltration goes deeper than anyone realizes. In Fallout 4, the Railroad Institute conflict appears straightforward: freedom fighters versus synth slavers. However, careful examination of terminals and environmental storytelling reveals the Institute has successfully infiltrated the railroad to an extraordinary degree. Multiple named railroad agents are actually Institute simps reporting back, and if you complete the game by siding with the Institute, you can find post-game terminals revealing that Glory, Deacon, and even Pam may have been compromised or monitored throughout your entire playthrough. What's particularly sinister is that the Institute doesn't just use this infiltration to destroy the railroad. They deliberately keep it alive as a pressure release valve to identify and track synths who develop independence. Terminal entries from Institute directors suggest they view the railroad as useful idiots who make escaped synths easier to track by forcing them into predictable safe houses and patterns. There's even evidence suggesting Patriot, the mysterious Institute insider helping synths escape, may himself be a sanctioned operative allowing a controlled stream of escapes to test synth independence and improve future models. The real mindbender is terminal entry suggesting Father knew about your involvement with the railroad before the meeting where he reveals it, making his entire relationship with you a manipulative test of loyalty versus sympathy. Fallout 3's Vault-106 experiment created the first successful psychics. Vault-106, filled with crazed survivors and hallucination-inducing gas, seems like a straightforward drug test gone wrong scenario. However, buried deep in the Vault's research terminals is evidence that the psychoactive compound released into the air wasn't a failure. It was actually a complete success. The experiment's true purpose wasn't to test behavior under hallucinogenic conditions, but to artificially induce psychic abilities through neurochemical enhancement. The hallucinations players experience aren't random, they're actually the psychic death echoes of the Vault's residents. Their final traumatic moments burned into the environment itself. If you have the Lawbringer or Contract Killer perk, you receive unique hallucinations showing alternate versions of yourself, suggesting the gas allows perception across probability branches. Terminal entries from the lead researcher describe test subjects beginning to share dreams, predict events, and in one case, apparently causing physical harm to another person through thought alone, before the experiment spiraled out of control. The researcher's final entry describes the subjects achieving collective consciousness before they all simultaneously died. What remained was their psychic residue, endlessly replaying their last moments. This explains why the Master in Fallout 1 was so interested in Vault-Tec's experiments. Some Vaults were actually testing ground for abilities he was trying to artificially create with FEV. Fallout New Vegas's Cook Companion exposed Vault-Tec's darkest secret. Obsidian Entertainment planned a companion named Ulysses for the main game before moving him to the Lonesome Road DLC. But even earlier drafts included a completely different character, a Vault-Tec scientist who survived in cryogenic suspension and knew the corporation's ultimate purpose. According to leaked design documents and Chris Avalone's GDC presentations, this character would have revealed that Vault-Tec knew exactly when the bombs would fall because they helped orchestrate the Great War itself. The Vaults weren't shelters with experiments. They were experiments that happened to be shelters. The scientist would explain that Vault-Tec was a front for a transitional corporate shadow government that believed nuclear war was inevitable and wanted to control human evolution in its aftermath. Each Vault experiment was designed to solve specific challenges of space colonization. Vault 11 tested obedience to authority. Vault 108 tested cloning. Vault 112 tested virtual reality sustainability, and so on. The revelation would reframe the entire series. The Great War wasn't political failure, but planned corporate eugenics on a global scale. Obsidian cut this character because Bethesda felt it was too definitive an answer to questions best left ambiguous, and because it made Vault-Tec unambiguously evil rather than recklessly experimental. Traces of this concept remain in terminals throughout Fallout New Vegas discussing the Selection and also Project Exodus. hinting at a planned corporate evacuation that never happened. The mysterious stranger is actually observable through game code analysis. The mysterious stranger, the enigmatic figure who occasionally appears to help you in combat, has been analyzed extensively by data miners, revealing deliberate design choices that make him even stranger. In every Fallout game he appears, the stranger is coded as a unique entity that exists outside normal NPC parameters. He has no dialogue flags, no faction associations, no inventory beyond his iconic .44 Magnum, and most bizarrely, no AI packages for anything except appearing and disappearing. What's genuinely weird is that in Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, the game tracks every single mysterious stranger appearance in a hidden counter that has no apparent purpose. It's not tied to any achievement or perk. Some modders who've examined this suggest it was meant to trigger a hidden quest after a certain number of appearances, but no such quest exists in the files. In Fallout 4, where the stranger is followed around by his own companion Misfortune, there are unused voice files where NPCs react to seeing him, suggesting Bethesda originally planned to make other characters acknowledge his existence before deciding his supernatural ambiguity was more interesting. Most intriguingly, the stranger shares a character model skeleton with an unnamed NPC type labeled Observer in Fallout 3's code, which appears in exactly one location, watching from a distance when you exit Vault 101 for the first time. The implication is that he's been following you from the very beginning. Fallout 2's intelligent plants were remnants of a pre-war superweapon. In Fallout 2, you can encounter Seymour, a talking spore plant in Gecko, who seems like a quirky one-off character providing comic relief. However, Seymour is actually a surviving specimen of Project Bloomsday, a pre-war bioweapon designed to terraform enemy territory by converting it into hostile plant-based ecosystems. Documents in the Sierra Army Depot reference experimental, aggressive botanical specimens that escaped containment shortly before the Great War. Seymour and the other spore plants scattered throughout the wasteland aren't FEV mutations. They're genetically engineered weapons that were designed to think, adapt, and spread. If you have a high science skill, Seymour reveals details about the others like him and mentions feeling connected to plants across vast distances, suggesting a hive mind network. The horrifying implication is that these plants are still following their original programming: convert organic matter into more plants, eventually creating a Venus-like atmosphere unsuitable for unmodified human life. This concept was later revisited in Fallout 3's Point Lookout DLC, where the Punga plants show similar invasive intelligence, and again in Fallout 76 with the Strangler plants. Harold's transformation into a tree god in Fallout 3 might not be random mutation, but the result of exposure to these same pre-war plant bioweapons, with his FEV mutated body providing the perfect host for their ultimate evolution. The Enclave's oil rig headquarters had a secret presidential bunker below it. In Fallout 2, you destroy the Enclave's oil rig headquarters, but cut content and developer interviews reveal there was an entire additional level below the main facility that never made it into the final game. This level housed the continuity of government bunker, where pre-war presidents and key officials were supposed to shelter during nuclear war. According to Chris Avallone, this area would have contained cryogenically preserved pre-war government officials who were supposed to wake up and rebuild America, but the system failed, leaving them frozen in a state between life and death. The current Enclave leadership under Dick Richardson knew about this bunker, but never told the general population because many of the preserved officials wouldn't have supported the Enclave's genocidal plans. You would have had the option to revive these officials and potentially create a faction split within the Enclave between old guard, pre-war constitutionalists and the new fascist regime. The level was cut to time constraints, and because testers found it tonally confusing. Having sympathetic Enclave members complicated the intended final boss narrative. However, references remain in Fallout 3's archives where President Eden mentions the Frozen Council and those who sleep beneath Raven Rock, suggesting Bethesda consider reviving this concept. The moral complexity of executing people who've been in cryo-sleep since before the war, who believe they're still serving a United States that no longer exists, would have added fascinating depth to Fallout 2's endgame. In Fallout 1997, the player could encounter a random event where a group of developers, including Tim Kaine, appear in-game as NPCs. Kaine himself carries an incredibly powerful .223 pistol prototype, which was actually based on Deckard's gun from Blade Runner. This weapon, later standardized, became one of the strongest sidearms in the early Fallout canon. Black Isle Studios originally considered removing the talking head animations because they were time-consuming to produce and ate into storage. However, they were kept due to their ability to make dialogue more immersive. Fallout 2 reduced their number drastically, making them feel more special. Only 13 exist in the entire game. Harold, the ghoul with a tree growing out of his head, was originally planned to die permanently in Fallout 2. Developers cut this after community feedback suggested Harold had become a mascot for Fallout, beloved for his humor and tragic backstory. He survived all the way to Fallout 3, where he finally met his end. Early concept art and design documents for Fallout 3 included a working motorcycle that could be repaired, upgraded, and ridden across the capital wasteland. It was scrapped due to world streaming limitations and the unpredictability of vehicle physics in Bethesda's engine, but modders later revived the idea. The Enclave was chosen as the faction's name because it suggested secrecy and exclusivity. In US history, the word enclave is used to describe a closed-off region, often militarized or politically isolated. Developers wanted the Enclave to feel like a shadow remnant of the US government, fitting their bunker-dwelling militarism. In Fallout 2, players could become a porn star in New Reno, one of the game's most infamous quests. What most people don't know is that the developers actually researched adult film contracts to write the in-game documents the Chosen One signs. The performance stats are based on charisma and endurance, with hidden scripts for particularly poor performances. Dogmeat's harsh mortality in Fallout 1 was so notorious that Fallout 2 included the magnetic personality and animal friend perks, partly as a tongue-in-cheek nod. Developers knew fans wanted Dogmeat and other animal companions to survive longer, so they coded in mechanics to protect them, although not perfectly. In Fallout Tactics, a cut random encounter involved the player stumbling upon a Deep One-style mutant worshipping strange idols. The event was removed, but its remnants are buried in the game files. This was a direct nod to H.P. Lovecraft, whom Fallout designers often cited as inspiration for the weird science elements of mutation and the unknown. While Caesar's Legion is overtly Roman, Josh Sawyer has explained that the Legion's brutality and ideology was modeled less after Julius Caesar's historical strategies and more on 20th century dictators like Mussolini. The pomp, propaganda, and obsession with control reflect fascist Italy far more than the ancient republic. Moira Brown's infamous Wasteland survival guide questline was initially considered filler. Bethesda nearly cut it because it was long and complex. However, designers kept it because it showcased player choice at every level. Ironically, it became one of the most beloved and defining questlines in Fallout 3. The Silver Shroud radio drama in Fallout 4 drew directly from fan-made role-playing content and mods where players pretended to be masked vigilantes in Fallout 3. Bethesda noticed this community trend and built an official questline around it, complete with costumes and a moral dilemma. Every single cryptid in Fallout 76, including the Mothman, Flatwoods Monster, and Grafton Monster, is drawn from real-life Appalachian folklore. Bethesda actually sent writers to interview locals about these legends to capture their regional flavor. The Mothman in particular became so popular that 76 leans into him almost as a mascot. The 2004 Fallout Brotherhood of Steel console game, Not Tactics, had licensed music from Slipknot and Killswitch Engage, making it stand out tonally from the main series' 40s-50s aesthetic. Licensing disputes later prevented re-releases of the game on digital storefronts, part of why it remains obscure. The Pip-Boy's cheerful cartoon mascot was deliberately created to be unsettling. Inspired by Cold War propaganda mascots, he represented the cheerful face of annihilation, encouraging people to obey Vault-Tec despite their sinister intentions. This duality became one of Fallout's most enduring stylistic choices. Vault 12, where the door failed to seal and exposed the inhabitants to radiation, was written in a single night by designer Scott Benny. He wanted an origin story for ghouls that was both horrific and bureaucratic, showing how Vault-Tec doomed entire populations with experiments. In Fallout 2, the Chosen One can encounter the Bridgekeeper, a clear parody of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. He asks trivia questions, and wrong answers lead to combat. What's lesser known is that his robe is technically the most powerful armor in the game, but it's hidden under joke stats unless the player digs into the code. The idea of a town built around a dormant nuke was pitched as too unbelievable by some Bethesda designers. Todd Howard pushed for it, insisting that Fallout is more absurdly grounded in seriousness. The quest, The Power of the Atom, became one of Fallout 3's most defining moral dilemmas. Fallout 2 featured a talking intelligent Deathclaw named Gorus. This was later considered too far-fetched by Bethesda when they took over the franchise, so talking Deathclaws were retconned as failed genetic experiments that no longer exist. Gorus remains one of the most debated characters in Fallout lore. Hardcore mode, which requires food, water, and sleep, was directly inspired by fan mods for Fallout 3. Josh Sawyer openly acknowledged these mods and worked with Obsidian to make the feature official, blending survival mechanics with role-playing depth. The Responder faction in Fallout 76, who tried to organize rescue and aid in the wasteland, were based on real Appalachian volunteer firefighters and EMT organizations. Bethesda wanted at least one faction to represent genuine selflessness, contrasting with the usual corruption of Fallout factions. Beyond the water chip time limit, developers initially designed a second hidden timer. If too much time passed, the Master's army would overrun the wasteland regardless of your choices. This was scrapped because playtesters hated unavoidable bad endings. The hubologists, who worship cosmic energy and spaceships, were written as a thinly veiled satire of Scientology. Designers even joked about being sued. Their questline ends with an ill-fated rocket launch, a jab at the cult's obsession with space transcendence. Bethesda reused assets from the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion for Fallout 3. The skeleton and rigging for super mutants is actually the same as orcs in Oblivion. This explains some of their oddly exaggerated animations. Nick Valentine's character was directly inspired by classic noir detectives like Sam Spade. His mannerisms, trench coat, and monologues were meant to feel ripped from 1940s pulp novels. Valentine became so beloved that fans petitioned for him to star in his own spin-off. Nuka-Cola Quantum's glowing look was developed long before Fallout 76, but the electric blue soda concept was based on Pepsi Blue, which was released in 2002 and quickly discontinued. Developers wanted a drink that looked toxic yet delicious. A sequel to Brotherhood of Steel in development and would have featured locations like Las Vegas, not to be confused with New Vegas, and tactics-inspired mechanics. It was cancelled when Interplay lost financial stability and all assets were scrapped. Ian, the first human companion in Fallout 1, was notorious for accidentally shooting the player during combat due to poor AI pathing. Fans joked about his betrayal was canon, leading to community memes about Ian being secretly untrustworthy. Joshua Graham, the Burned Man, was intentionally written as a living legend. Writers originally debated if he should have died in the Grand Canyon, as logic would dictate. They decided his survival emphasized themes of faith, resilience, and myth-building in the wasteland. If the player frees the synths in Fallout 4, the narrative parallels Blade Runner, especially the escaped replicants theme. Bethesda even noted in commentary that the Railroad faction was their homage to the replicant struggle. Fallout Tactics includes endings where the Brotherhood uses advanced technology to conquer huge regions. Later games downplay this because Bethesda only considers some events from Tactics canon. This created one of Fallout's longest-running lore debates. Harold the Ghoul Tree hybrid wasn't originally going to be in Fallout 3. Bethesda included him after fan pressure, but Todd Howard admitted later that they weren't sure what to do with him, leading to his final, tragic role in Oasis. A cut encounter in Fallout 2 involved fighting an unstoppable robot called the Infiltrator, a parody of the Terminator. It was removed for time constraints, but still exists in partial code. Choosing Fenway Park wasn't just a Boston reference. Developers wanted to symbolize a community forming inside the ruins of an American pastime. Baseball's themes of tradition and nostalgia mirrored Fallout's retro-futuristic tone. The Mothman shrines in Fallout 76 don't always summon the same variant. Some versions bless the player with buffs, while others summon hostile Mothmen. This reflects real folklore, where the Mothman is seen as alternatively as a protector or a harbinger of doom. The slideshow endings in Fallout 1, which narrate the fates of towns based on player choices, were inspired directly by Interplay's earlier RPG Wasteland. Fallout was originally conceived as a spiritual successor, so the ending mechanic was carried over. The Pit DLC in Fallout 3, which takes place in a raider-run steel mill, was designed as a commentary on industrial labor abuse. The setting and oppressive conditions drew inspiration from Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. Liberty Prime was nearly left out of Fallout 4 due to technical limitations. Animating a giant robot moving through a dense city was challenging, but Bethesda re-engineered the animations from Fallout 3 to make it feasible. When Fallout 76 was first announced, developers envisioned nukes as a way for groups to unlock raids and rare loot zones. Instead, players quickly used them to grief others. Bethesda later patched in safeguards to limit abuse. The Master, Fallout's final boss, was voiced by Philip Athens, who was also a lead designer. His lines were heavily distorted with audio layering to create the unsettling multi-voice effect, symbolizing the Master's many consciousnesses fused together. The Dunwich Building in Fallout 3, a terrifying location tied to Lovecraftian horror, was intentionally left unresolved so Bethesda could revisit the theme later. Fallout 4's Dunwich borrowers expanded on this, cementing Fallout's unofficial ties to cosmic horror. Marcus, the friendly super mutant sheriff on Broken Hills, was voiced by Michael Dorn, best known as Worf in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Dorn later reprised his role in Fallout New Vegas, cementing Marcus as one of Fallout's most iconic characters. Codsworth, the robotic butler, was programmed to recognize and speak over 900 possible player character names. This massive voice acting effort was one of the most ambitious personalization features in Fallout history. The Mordino, Bishop, Wright, and Salvatore families in New Reno were all modeled loosely on real-world mafia families from the West Coast and Nevada. Writers researched organized crime extensively to give each family authentic quirks and rivalries. Vault 108, where the player encounters nothing but clones of a man named Gary, was created as a Darkly Comet Vault experiment. Developers joked that it was their lazy vault, since it only required recording one set of voice lines over and over again. Yes Man, the ever-agreeable AI, was created specifically for players who didn't trust or like any major faction. Writers wanted to provide a true independence ending, where the player could take power without aligning with NCR, Caesar's Legion, or Mr. House. The in-game Nuka-Cola plant in West Virginia is based on a real Kanawha soda bottling facility. Bethesda altered details but used real maps of the site for environmental design. The Chosen One's car, one of the first drivable vehicles in Fallout history, caused major issues for developers. It constantly broke maps, dialogue triggers, and inventory systems. Entire weeks were spent debugging it. That's partly why vehicles disappeared in later Fallout games. President Eden, the AI running the Enclave in Fallout 3, was deliberately written as a commentary on Cold War fears of machines taking control of nuclear weapons. His calm, patriotic voice was meant to contrast with the horror of an unfeeling computer deciding humanity's fate. The reveal that Sean is actually a synth child was added late in development. Early drafts had him remain a kidnapped biological son. Bethesda added the synth twist to emphasize Fallout 4's themes of identity, memory, and humanity. The design of Deathclaws was directly influenced by the xenomorph from Alien. Developers wanted a terrifying, fast predator that felt like a force of nature, not just another mutant. Their claws and hunched posture echo Geiger's alien designs. In New Vegas, the final battle at Hoover Dam can play out in dozens of permutations based on choices. Designers revealed that the scripting for the battle is so fragile that even minor bugs can cause entire armies not to spawn. This makes it one of the most unstable yet ambitious endings in RPG history. The DC Metro tunnels in Fallout 3 were infamous among developers. Bethesda admitted that the confusing maze design was partly unintentional, caused by a rush to connect map cells without a master layout. Fans hated it, but it became oddly iconic. President Richardson, the Enclave leader in Fallout 2, has no scenario where he survives the game. Writers intentionally forced his death because they wanted the Enclave to feel like it had no future. The Railroad's headquarters in Fallout 4, hidden beneath Old North Church, was inspired by real crypts and tunnels beneath Boston churches. Bethesda designers toured some of these historical sites for reference. The Wild Wasteland Park, which unlocks dozens of bizarre pop culture encounters, was controversial among developers. Some argued it broke immersion. It stayed because Josh Sawyer wanted a switch that let players choose how silly they wanted their Fallout. The Fast Not Day event in Fallout 76, featuring strange masks and parades, is based on a real Swiss-German tradition in Helvetia, West Virginia. Bethesda faithfully recreated many of the festival's quirks, blending local culture with wasteland absurdity. In the original Fallout 3 ending, the player was forced to sacrifice themselves by entering Project Purity's chamber, regardless of companions. Testers hated this lack of choice. Bethesda patched it with broken steel, allowing alternate outcomes. The Minutemen faction's design and structure directly reference colonial militias from the American Revolution. Bethesda wanted a faction that embodied grassroots resistance, contrasting with the authoritarian NCR and Enclave. Fallout tactics included a tribe of intelligent Deathclaws who could speak and form alliances with humans. This was one of the strangest storylines in Fallout history, and it contributed to tactics' semi-canon status. Vault City, a pristine settlement in Fallout 2, was designed as a commentary on eugenics and exclusionary societies. Its obsession with genetic purity and harsh laws satirized real-world debates on who deserves citizenship. In Tenpenny Tower, even if you broke a peace between ghouls and humans, the humans eventually massacre the ghouls off-screen. Bethesda wanted to underline that sometimes in Fallout, no compromise leads to lasting peace. Preston Garvey's repetitive settlement quests were caused by a scripting oversight that kept recycling the same Radiant missions. Bethesda didn't intend him to become a meme, but "another settlement needs your help" became one of Fallout's most infamous lines. The iconic NCR Ranger combat armor, with its trench coat and glowing red goggles, was inspired by German World War II-era gas masks combined with Wild West imagery. It became so iconic that Bethesda later reused it in Fallout 76 as a pre-order bonus. When Fallout 76 launched without human NPCs, players revolted. The Wastelanders update in 2020 was essentially a soft reboot of the entire game, reintroducing traditional dialogue trees and factions to restore Fallout's RPG identity. Early drafts of Fallout 1's ending allowed the Vault Dweller to take control of the Vault after defeating the Master. Developers cut it because they felt the story should emphasize exile and tragedy, not personal power. The boxing minigame in New Reno was inspired by real boxing legends of the 20th century. Writers inserted subtle references to fighters like Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson into opponent styles and dialogue. 3 dogs rotating radio updates in Fallout 3 required a massive amount of conditional scripting. Bethesda said it was one of the hardest systems to implement because it had to track hundreds of player decisions dynamically. Automatron, the first Fallout 4 DLC, was written as a direct homage to cheesy 1950s sci-fi robot invasion stories. The mechanist's costume and dialogue were patterned on pulp comic villains. Vault-Zero, the brain of the US war machine in Fallout Tactics, was originally meant to serve as a future hub for sequels. Interplay intended to make multiple spin-offs around Vault-Zero's influence before the franchise changed hands. In Fallout 2, players could find talking two-headed Brahmin. This bizarre encounter was inserted by developers as a late-night joke, but made it into the final build. It's one of the strangest canon moments in Fallout. The Point Lookout DLC in Fallout 3 was intentionally disconnected from the Enclave plot. Bethesda designed it as a standalone survival horror experience to experiment with tone and storytelling variety. The Institute's secretive underground labs were modeled after Cold War-era fears of hidden government facilities like Cheyenne Mountain. Bethesda wanted them to feel like both a utopia and a nightmare, reflecting paranoia about technology. Mr. House, the reclusive tycoon controlling New Vegas, was heavily inspired by Howard Hughes. Like Hughes, Howe was obsessed with aviation, technology, and immortality, and became a hermit in his later life. The main Overseer NPC in Fallout 76 marked the first time Bethesda made a Vault Overseer central to a Fallout game story. This was done to emphasize the Overseer logs as a narrative tool. Shady Sands, a tiny town in Fallout 1, was expanded into the capital of the NCR in Fallout 2 simply because writers needed a base for the growing Republic. Its humble origins contrasted with its later political power. The Gecko nuclear plant dilemma, where Vault City debates whether to share or hoard energy, was inspired by 1990s energy policy debates in California, where nuclear power was hotly contested. The Operation Anchorage DLC, a simulation of the Chinese invasion of Alaska, was written primarily to let players finally see the famous war only hinted at in lore. It had little to do with the main plot, but satisfied longtime fan curiosity. The settlement building system in Fallout 4 was originally conceived as a side feature. Todd Howard pushed for it to become a core mechanic after seeing how popular mods like Fallout 3's player homes had been. Early prototypes of Fallout Tactics experimented with a first-person mode, years before Bethesda took the franchise in that direction. Developers quickly abandoned it due to technical limitations. The strange talking plants in Fallout 2 were originally meant as a wild wasteland-style joke, but were never marked as non-canon. They remain an odd, unexplained piece of Fallout's world. In Fallout 3, super mutants come from Vault 87's FEV experiments. This was Bethesda's retcon to explain their East Coast presence, since previously they were West Coast only. Fans still debate the plausibility of this. The fog-shrouded island of Far Harbor was directly inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's The Shadow over Innsmouth. The cult-like children of Atom in the DLC were a nod to Lovecraft's fish-worshipping cults. Several planned companion quests, including deeper arcs for Arcade Gannon and Veronica, were cut due to time constraints. Obsidian developers later admitted they wished they had more time to flesh them out. Vault 94 was introduced as Fallout 76's first raid-style dungeon, but it was plagued by bugs and performance issues. Bethesda eventually shut it down entirely, making it one of the most short-lived pieces of Fallout content. The Glow Dungeon was deliberately designed to punish unprepared players. Developers wanted it to feel like a survival horror level in the middle of an RPG. Fallout 2 had far fewer animated talking heads than Fallout 1 because the animations ate up too much disk space. Designers prioritized certain characters, leaving most NPCs without them. If the player progresses far enough with Liberty Prime before entering Raven Rock, scripts exist to allow Prime to nuke it entirely. This was cut for stability, but partially restored by modders. Early drafts of Fallout 4 had Kellogg as the main antagonist, with the Institute taking a back seat. Writers later decided he should be a stepping stone villain instead, leading to the Shaun Institute twist. The design of recruitable robots in Fallout Tactics was heavily influenced by the MechWarrior franchise. Developers wanted players to feel like they were commanding a ragtag mercenary force with diverse unit types. The design of recruitable robots in Fallout Tactics was heavily influenced by the MechWarrior franchise. Developers wanted players to feel like they were commanding a ragtag mercenary force with diverse unit types. In Fallout 2, President Tandy's aide carries a Mr. Nixon doll, a direct parody of Richard Nixon. It was a late-night joke quest item poking fun at political scandals. Bethesda designed Fallout 3's DLCs to feel like different genres. Anchorage, being military sim, The Pit, being industrial survival, Broken Steel, being epic continuation, Point Lookout, being horror, and Mothership Zeta, being sci-fi comedy. This was meant to showcase Fallout's tonal flexibility. Settlement defense missions in Fallout 4 were bugged at launch, with enemies often spawning inside walls or missing entirely. Bethesda patched them repeatedly, but never fully fixed the system. Obsidian used real engineering blueprints of Hoover Dam to construct the in-game location, adjusting scale only slightly for gameplay. The Brotherhood of Steel appears in Fallout 76 decades earlier than lore allowed. Bethesda later explained this through Lost Expedition retcons, but fans still debate the continuity break. Originally, the cartoon mascot was Pip-Boy, but to avoid confusion with the wrist computer, designers renamed him Vault-Boy. Fans still mix them up. If the Chosen One has very low intelligence, entire dialogue trees change. The dumb dialogue path is so extensive, the developers joked it was like writing a whole second game. Enclave Radio, which only plays patriotic music, was originally going to feature propaganda speeches from President Eden. These were cut due to time, but restored in some mods. The glowing green teleportation effect for the Institute was one of the most complex visual effects Bethesda had made up to that point. It was designed to sell the Institute's technological superiority. In Fallout 76, players can find Nuka-Cola mystery flavor. Bethesda actually ran a real-world version of this, sending out mystery-flavored sodas to influencers without revealing the flavor, blurring the line between the in-game marketing and real-world promotions. And with that, brings us to the end of our collection of Fallout facts. Fallout endures because it refuses to offer easy answers. Beneath the power armor, mutations, and ruined cities lies a deeply human story about fear, ambition, and the cost of survival. Every game asks the same question in a different way. If the world ended tomorrow, would we truly build something better, or repeat the same mistakes all over again? Thank you for listening. We hope you sleep well. Good night.